Samsung would love for you to think the Galaxy Z Fold is the only foldable worth considering, but I disagree. I think you should be looking at one of these two instead. So if you're tired of Samsung and want to try something new, should you pick Oppo's beautifully crafted creaseless powerhouse or Google's aesthetic delight with clean software? I'm Cam Bunton from Trusted Reviews, and in this video I'll answer those questions. While you're here, if you do like it, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe and tap that notification bell. Thank you. So first up, about that design. Anyone following the mobile tech industry knows that when it comes to driving hardware innovation, no companies really do it like the Chinese companies do. Think of Oppo, Honor, Huawei, they all get things nailed before they end up on phones from the mainstream Western brands. As an example, the hinge design in the Oppo phone doesn't just make for a thinner device, it also meant it's the closest thing to an invisible crease in the display. Compare it to the Pixel and it's really no contest. The Pixel's is more visible and it's not something you can easily ignore when you run your finger across it either. I've been using the previous Pixel 9 Pro Fold recently and I even think it's a bit of a step backwards from that. The phone's also thicker and heavier than Oppo's, and noticeably so. We're talking about 2mm extra thickness and more than 30 grams extra in weight. The frustrating part is that for all that added thickness and weight, Google didn't even make the trade-off worth it with a bigger battery. But we'll get onto that later. But so this doesn't come off as a massive anti-Pixel rant, because I genuinely do love using the Pixel Fold, there is one added benefit. Pixel Snap, magnets, MagSafe, whatever you want to call it. Having that ring of magnets built right into the back of the phone is actually super convenient. It's useful for MagSafe wireless charging stands, but more than that, also means you can snap on grips, wallets and battery packs without needing to use a case. Although to be fair to Oppo, if you did find a MagSafe compatible case for the Find N6, you could use all the same functions and probably still have a device that wasn't any thicker than the Pixel Fold. But what usually draws me to using the Pixel Fold over the Oppo is also oddly design related. The shorter, squatter form factor means I find using both the cover screen and the internal display more comfortable most of the time, at least when using two hands. Partly thanks to the scaling and arrangement of things like the keyboard and other interface elements, but also because it doesn't feel quite as massive and long. That cover screen being under a 20:9 ratio, where Oppo's is almost 21:9, means less of that long, narrow feel, but I'll speak more about the screens in a bit. Still, that narrow feel does at least make swiping on the keyboard more convenient and comfortable on the Oppo, using it one-handed. Even if reaching the upper parts of the screen is more difficult and two-handed typing feels a little bit more cramped. But at least there's no compromise when it comes to display bezel here. The cover screen takes up a lot more of that available front space than the Pixel's comparatively chunky bezeled display does. Both phones are pretty much gapless when shut, so I haven't had any real issue with dust or fluff collecting on the inside, and both have some form of water and dust resistance too. Oppo has a dual IP58 and 59 rating, which means it's protected against being submerged and being sprayed with jets of water, but with its IP68 rating, the Pixel has better dust resistance, as well as that protection against being submerged in water. Now, if you were to list display specs for both displays, taking into account the size, the pixel density, the brightness, the dimming, and the aforementioned crease, it's hard to come away with any opinion other than the Find N6 is better. Even though I prefer the aspect ratio and the feel of the Pixel Fold screens, the actual technical capabilities and performance are just that bit below what Oppo can manage. Still, despite the Oppo technically having the brighter display, I can't say that I saw a massive benefit to using the Oppo over the Pixel outdoors under bright daylight, and if anything, when settling down at night time to read news and relax, I often found it was a bit too bright. But there's no getting away from the fact that it's got two very good displays. The narrower aspect ratio display on the front means it's not quite as well suited to video watching as the Pixel, either cropping in quite heavily or adding chunky pillar boxes to content, but the internal display is really very good. Put your videos in full screen and rotate to 90 degrees and you get video playback that's more expansive on the Oppo phone. That's even more useful if you happen to like watching video with the screen angled upwards, setting it up like a mini laptop of sorts. By default, I'd say the Pixel display has more of a warm tint to it, where Oppo's is cooler and has the slightest green tint to it when viewed at an angle. I also found that in general it was clearer than the Pixel with ever so slightly inkier, deeper black levels. But in truth, there's not that much in this. I think regardless of which of these two phones you opt for, the display quality isn't going to be what makes up your mind. More important, I'd argue, is how the software makes use of those displays. And massive credit has to go to Oppo here for making a better use of that large tablet-like panel. The interface is more akin to that of a desktop, with a dock at the bottom and easy access to your app drawer in a pop-up window, and recent files and excellent floating multi-window and split-screen abilities. By comparison, Pixel software feels a little bit more limited. And I also really like how Oppo's home screen organization is managed. Specifically, the ability to have large folders for easy access and organization of apps. Both are very customizable in terms of theming and colors and icon packs, and I'm a big fan of the Pixel interface overall with its clean, color-rich and attractive elements and widgets, but it could do more to take advantage of that large internal screen. I found the camera comparison between these two phones quite interesting because it felt like a battle between better hardware and computational photography. Google's image processing is very clever, but the Oppo has bigger, more pixel-dense sensors across all three lenses compared to the Pixel. And in the daytime, in almost every shot, regardless of which lens I was using, it was the Oppo that I preferred, and the Oppo that I think is the best overall. And a couple of things swung it for me. First is the aggressive HDR and processing from the Pixel. I often found it would lift the shadows just that little bit too much, so reducing contrast in images in order to make it flatter, because it removes some shadow from where it should be. I think contrast in images is good and necessary, as long as there's balance and it's not extreme to the point of having blown out highlights and really dark shadows and nothing in between, and Oppo's processing for the most part has that balance more than the Pixel does. And it doesn't matter which of the three cameras I used, I had that same sense. I think what surprised me more, however, was that despite the Oppo having a 3x zoom equivalent lens versus 5x on the Pixel, I almost always preferred the results from the Oppo's zoom as well. Perhaps down to the smaller sensor size on the Pixel and the lower pixel count and aggressive processing, I found that the Pixel struggled with complicated textures like leaves on bushes and trees, introducing this weird sort of wormy effect which becomes even more apparent when you zoom to 10 or 20 times. Add that to the flat dynamic range and lacking in shadows and contrast, and the Oppo, even at 10x zoom a lot of the time, gave me pictures which I thought were cleaner and better looking. Add that to the more pleasant warm color tones, and overall, Oppo would be my choice of these two for daytime photography. Using the cameras for selfies, regardless of whether I used the cover screen camera or the main cameras on the back, again, I preferred Oppo's processing. It was softer with less aggressive over-sharpening. When you have aging skin, you definitely don't need a camera processing the details and exaggerating every loose pore or wrinkle more than it needs to be. Oppo's textures and detail were far more lifelike and less exaggerated. At nighttime though, Pixel's emphasis on computational processing really comes into its own, particularly on that ultra-wide and the zoom lenses. The ultra-wide camera on the Oppo really struggled at nighttime and also had a really weird warm tint to it that was completely different to the color balance and feeling of the main camera. I'm not saying the Pixel's ultra-wide camera is perfect, but it did at least produce the same tone as the main camera, as did the zoom. Both phones' ultra-wide cameras struggled to focus when light levels dropped really low at times, again showing the limitations of the hardware. And despite generally being quite decent cameras, they're still not near the quality you'd get from a powerful slab phone. Use the zoom cameras on either phone at night and you'll see the telltale signs of that aggressive processing, where details get blotchy and almost look like an oil painting from both phones. But Oppo's often struggle to focus, where Google's more capable machine learning processing meant those zoomed images, as well as being further into the scene, were generally sharper and cleaner. I wouldn't say either of these two phones is much of a video champion. Pixel video tends to look a bit over-sharpened, contrasty and oversaturated, where Oppo seems overexposed and often struggles with lens flare. But you can shoot 4K 60 with both and get usable results for social media, plus Oppo's even lets you shoot 4K up to 120 frames per second. And when it comes to pure performance and grunt, whether talking graphics processing abilities or battery life, there's no real competition between these two. Both the CPU processing and the GPU processing on the Oppo runs circles around the Pixel phone. It has this feeling that it's doing everything quicker and finds it easier. Because its ceiling is so high, pretty much everything feels really effortless. The Pixel can handle pretty much anything, but its processor isn't as efficient or speedy, and so some tasks can feel like they take a second or two longer, but in all honesty, when I'm using it day in and day out, I never felt like it was sluggish or struggling. Just that it doesn't take everything in its stride as much as the Oppo. And if I did want to put some time into gaming like Destiny Rising or Call of Duty, it's the Oppo I'd rather use for that. Likewise, if I wanted to run multiple apps at the same time on the screen, the Oppo again would be my preferred choice, and not just because I prefer the multitasking implementation. So if you're pushing them to their absolute limits, it's the Oppo that's going to find that easier, where the Pixel will more likely throttle sooner. Battery life and charging speeds, again, the Oppo wins hands down. A 6000 mAh battery beating a 5000 mAh one is hardly a surprise though. But what perhaps is that with the Oppo phone I can comfortably get to about 2 days of use on a full charge. I am a fairly light user, but the Pixel Fold wouldn't quite get me there. Pixel, with its less efficient chip, seems to struggle more with heavy use, especially when you go through a heatwave like we've just had in the UK. And that tends to also affect the battery life a little bit, but still I think it would be a comfortable one-day phone for even the heaviest users. Just don't expect it to go much more than that. Refilling an empty battery is no contest either. 80 watt wired speeds with a proprietary charger, or 50 watt wireless speeds, again with a proprietary charger, means it'll hit the 50% mark much faster than if you use the 30 watt wired or 15 watt wireless Qi 2 charging on the Pixel Fold. So outright performance, battery life, charging speeds, the Oppo wins them all. Overall, if it wasn't for one quite major thing, the Oppo wins this hands down. It's a better phone than the Pixel Fold and is a better phone than the Samsung. The creaseless display, the lighter, thinner build, more powerful chipset, longer battery life, faster charging and better cameras in most conditions all point to a stronger all-round phone. That's without mentioning the software that's better optimized for that larger internal screen. Still, there is that elephant in the room. Unless you're happy to import one, you're going to struggle to be able to buy one. And it's pretty expensive. Where, with it being more readily available and the fact you can probably find it quite heavily discounted now, at least it was on the Google UK store recently, the Pixel Fold is very much easier to get hold of and more affordable. But in all honesty, if the question is which one of these is the best, it's the Oppo. But if the question is which one should you buy, I think the answer has to be the Pixel Fold. Either way, I prefer both of them to the Samsung. The Oppo because I think it's generally the best all-round foldable, and the Pixel because of its more useful aspect ratio on the cover screen and the cleaner, lighter software, I think is also a better experience than Samsung's, or at least worth considering alongside it. But let me know what you think of these two. Would you risk an import to get the better of the two phones? Sound off in the comments, or you can grab me on Threads. I'm at CamBunted. If you did like this video, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe and tap that notification bell, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.